Okay, Milton. Oh, it's tough to get good economic assistance. Thank you, I think. All right, welcome, macroeconomics class. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're all fine and doing well, staying healthy, and we're getting through this thing, okay? All right, we're gonna talk a little bit about aggregate expenditures today, also federal budget. We're gonna have two more videos to complete the semester. We're gonna be pretty big ones. One will be on money, and the other one will be on fiscal and monetary policy. So fasten your seatbelts. This is gonna be it'll be a substantial lecture, but the questions for the final exam are going to come, you will need your book, but they're going to come a lot from these lectures. So, pay attention, okay? All right. So, where were we last time? Well, last time we were talking about aggregates, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, short run, long run, and we're going to continue on in that vein. We're going to talk about aggregate expenditures, all right? And just like before, aggregate means all summed together. Well, now you remember from our definitions of gross domestic product, one was the expenditure definition, which was C plus I plus G plus net exports, okay? All right, and that's where we're getting all of our expenditures. We're gonna, pull them from all these sources. We'll start with C, consumption, consumers' consumption, because basically it is the largest. It is it's a little over 70% of total expenditures. So we'll start with that one. And when we start with consumption, first of all, we have to get to what disposable income is. Now, disposable income is basically, you take your income from all sources, okay? Every place that you're making money from, and government transfers, which we'll talk about in a second, which are payments to you that you give no good or service in return, okay? Take all your income and you subtract your taxes, that Uncle Sam once says, and what's left is your income that you may dispose of. So they oddly enough named it disposable income. All right, so disposable income is all your income minus taxes. Now, what do you do with this disposable income? Well, you can only do one of two things. You either, although my children say there's only one thing you can do with it, but actually there are two things you can do with disposable income. You can spend it or you can save it, all right? So when we talk about, well, are we going to spend it? What are we going to do with this income? We come to marginal propensity to consume. And remember from before, marginal means one more, additional, one more. Okay, so in the same vein, we talk about the marginal propensity to consume. Would be, for instance, if you, in your career, let's say you just got a $1,000 raise, all right? How much of that $1,000 would you spend? Now, some folks, I am related to some folks who would spend 1,000 of it, and maybe even 1,500, but that's advanced economics. But how much of the 1,000 would you spend? $500, 200? Well, let's say you would spend 750 of new money, of $1,000. And that's exactly what we're looking at with the marginal propensity to consume. You said, okay, so you got a $1,000 raise, and here, and you're spending 750 of it. Well, like we said, whatever you don't spend, you save. So if your marginal propensity to consume was 750 over 1,000, your marginal propensity to save would be the 250 over 1,000. Remember, marginal propensity to consume plus your marginal propensity to save will equal 1, all right? Because if I shrink this down, this 750 over 1,000 comes to 3/4. So you're spending 3/4 of your new money and you're saving 1/4 of it, all right? Okay, so we've got marginal propensity to consume. How much of that, disposable income are you going to spend? And then we have to add one more thing to it. Even if you had no income at all right, you would still be spending some money, all right, albeit it would be a small amount. But you're still going to be spending a little money anyway, okay? Well, that little bit of money, that even if you had zero income, we call that autonomous consumption spending, meaning that spending, even if you didn't have any income coming in, you're still going to be spending some money, perhaps on necessities, one thing or another, but it's going to be money spent without income. So we call that autonomous consumption spending. We say that's A. So we figure it out, we say, okay, consumption is equal to the autonomous, first of all we start with the autonomous consumption, spending, even if we didn't have income. Then we take our disposable income and multiply it by, our marginal propensity to consume, just to see how much we would spend of it. And we're going to talk about why this is important in just a little bit, okay? Now, second part is investment. Well, you have investment. They're planning on companies are buying this or that, or they're adding to inventories. This can break down into planned and unplanned investment spending, okay? And we'll talk about that in just 1 second. So that is investment. And then we have, we'll get to government and net exports in a minute. So let's go to our diagram here. Here we have aggregate spending, and here we have real GDP. If aggregate spending was always equal to what we made, we spent, for everything that was made, there was $1 spent, we would have this red line at a 45 degrees. So it would be dollar for dollar. $10 made, $10 spent, okay? And we would look like that. Now, let's draw our line here we have our aggregate spending is C plus planned investment spending, okay? And that looks like this, because this is the autonomous portion. This is the amount that you're spending no matter what, okay? And this is what our line looks like. Now, we haven't added government or net exports yet, but we will in a second. Now, when it looks like this, we say, okay, here at this point, our total spending, equals what was made is equal to what was spent. And that's our equilibrium right there, okay? If we are somewhere over here, it means our spending is higher than what we made. So what you're going to have what they call a negative unplanned investment spending. People are spending and we didn't make enough. So we have to increase production, and we will till we get up to this equilibrium point. The opposite can also be true. Perhaps we made too much stuff and there wasn't enough spending to support it, okay? Now your unplanned investment has to be cut back, and that's exactly what we will do, and it brings us back to there. All right, so that's our equilibrium point. Now, if we had government and we had net exports, all we're doing is we're shifting this line up to here and here. Okay. It's also known as a Keynesian cross, but I don't believe it went into much detail in our book. Okay? So, what this represents now, again, and we talked about this before when we talked about GDP, but we're saying total spending is giving us our real GDP, okay? Now, what is interesting about that, this equilibrium point that we're at here, it doesn't necessarily mean we are at full employment, okay? If spending is really, really low, okay, we could be at an equilibrium point and we could still be below our potential. So we could still be not at full employment, all right? Now, how does the multiplier tie into all this? Well, the multiplier ties into all this in this way. The multiplier is 1 over 1 minus our marginal propensity to consume, okay? So what does that mean? All right, well, if we took 1 over 1 minus 3/4, that gives us 1 over a quarter, okay? So 1 over a fraction, you invert the fraction, we end up with 4. So if you're spending 3/4 of disposable income, if your marginal propensity to consume is 3/4, that's going to multiply. Every new dollar pumped into the economy is going to have a multiplier effect of 4. That's why the marginal propensity to consume is so important. Because if the marginal propensity to consume was smaller than 3/4, well, our multiplier gets smaller, okay? And basically that's why if we have a certain amount of money pumped into the economy, let's say up here, we go from here to here, that's a small increase, but in reality, it's going to result in going from here to here in terms of our output. And that's due, this little increase results in this big one due to the multiplier, okay? And that's why that comes into play. That's why it's important, all right? So if you get a question that says, you know, if you're spending, you know, $600 out of $1,000, you know, what would the multiplier be? It will be something that won't be too difficult, I'm sure. Okay? All right. Now we get into federal budgets. Okay? Pretty much basic. Everyone seems to have a budget, right? It's your money going out, your money coming in. Okay, the federal government has a budget too, although their money can go out and they don't have to always have the money coming in to support it. But that's the advantage of being the federal government and not an individual. All right, so what comes in on the federal budget, that's the taxes. And minus what's going out, that's government spending and transfer payments. We'll talk a minute about transfer payments. Transfer payment is like a gift. Now, folks are always thinking of a transfer payment in relationship to government. It doesn't have to be that way. A transfer payment could be something that if you have, let's say you have poor relatives back in Europe, and you or your parents send them a check every month for $50 or $100 or something. You're not expecting any good or service in return for the money you're spending. You're sending them, right? That's a transfer payment, okay? So a transfer payment is exactly what it says it is. It's transferring money from one party to another, but there isn't a reciprocal amount of goods or services coming back, okay? So with government transfers, that means government's giving you or I or someone money, something, and they're not getting anything in return, okay? That's a transfer payment. Now, the thing that you have to remember about a transfer payment is the number one example for a transfer payment is Social Security. And I would tell you not to say that around anyone who's 66 years of age or older, because you're probably going to get in a big argument, because they're going to say, wait a minute, I paid into that for 30 or 40 years. That's no gift, all right? Anyway, Social Security is used as a classic example of a government transfer payment. I like, actually, a better example, I think, would be unemployment insurance, especially look what's happening nowadays. You've got so many folks unemployed. They're getting some money for the government. Are they giving any good or service in return? No, that's a classic government transfer payment, and you won't get in a fight with anyone my age or much older. All right? Okay, so we've got this, and now we've got government outlays. They break down into mandatory and discretionary, okay? Mandatory, things typically that the government can't change unless they change the law, all right? Sometimes they're called entitlement programs. Social Security would be one of these. In fact, of the largest outlays, Social Security and Medicare make up the biggest part, okay, of these mandatory expenses, all right? Medicare, again, that's programs to take care of the health of folks that are 65 and older. There's also Medicaid, which is slightly different. That is a program to help the folks who just cannot afford health insurance, all right? The discretionary outlays would be, spending on bridges, loading facilities, ports, roads, defense spending, huge amount of discretionary. Also, government workers, payment to government workers. Now, all of that discretionary spending, that can be changed, okay? Now, last one of government outlays would be interest payments. For instance, on folks holding T-bills, treasury bills, short-term government bonds, they're expecting their payment, okay? So these three, mandatory, discretionary, and interest payment, are basically the outlays. Some, I know in the book, they talk about the problems with Social Security. Well, the problems with Social Security are that, number one, folks are living a lot longer than they did. When they passed Social Security in 1930, folks weren't living all that much older than 65. So there wasn't a huge amount of years that the government was looking to have to pay them. Well, now people are living longer. Another problem that we run into is that a lot of folks that were working, they've already retired, okay? When there was a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 people working, supporting one person on Social Security, a lot of those people have retired. And now you're coming into the baby boomers in my age bracket, where we have a huge number of people who are working, but they are either retiring or they're right on the verge of retiring. That's putting a lot of stress on Social Security. The long and short of it is, don't worry, I'm sure they're going to come up with some modification to keep Social Security going. So I know a lot of students say, oh, I'll never see Social Security. That's not true. They'll have to modify it, maybe take out a little bit more in taxes, but they're going to do something, to keep it going. All right? So, which brings us to government income. Well, government income, number one is personal income tax, okay? Now, personal income tax started in 1913. As a matter of fact, it topped out then at 6%. Oddly enough, before that, the government was getting their funds from taxes on imports. All right, they didn't have an income tax. As a matter of fact, interesting story, when it was first passed in 1913, it was almost considered a status symbol if you had to pay income tax. So, how times have changed. Anyway, now we have a progressive system, meaning the more income you make, the higher tax bracket you're in. All right, now it's at 39.6, which is still a lot better than it was years and years ago. It was over 90%. So it's progressive, but it's not quite as bad as it had been. All right? Now, the taxes that they take, they take Social Security out of your check right away. Okay? That's a tax. You pay half and your employer pays half. You pay 7.65% and your employer pays 7.65%. That's why if you mention Social Security as a transfer payment and someone who's been paying that all of his life, hears you say that, you're going to get an argument about it. Okay? All right. Also, they take the tax out for Medicare. That's the big one. Also, we have corporate tax, estate tax, gift tax, excise tax, which would be a tax on a particular good or service. For instance, they have a gasoline tax or a tax on cigarettes or alcohol. All right? And then we have our custom tax, which was the original to begin with. Okay, now, again, with budgets, you probably have a budget. Well, if you spend more than you bring in, are you running a balanced budget? No. When the federal government balances the budget, their outlays are equal to what's coming in. If their outlays are a lot more than what's coming in, which unfortunately is usually the case, and especially going to be the case this year, we say that the government is running a budget deficit, right? If they bring in more in taxes than what they spend, they call it a big surprise, and they also, economically speaking, we call it a budget surplus, okay? Now, government debt. That is the total debt the government owes, and it's accumulation of all the deficits year after year. If we keep having a deficit this year, it's just the debt, it's just added to the debt. It's added to the debt. This year, it's going to be an unbelievable addition to our national debt. But it's needed to help, jumpstart and get the economy back going. All right? Now, some folks, they talk about, the debt is so high, it's crushing the economy. The key thing to look at is your debt to GDP ratio. For instance, if you owe $500 billion, but your GDP is 25 trillion, that's nothing. All right? So that ratio is the key. And right now we're running, it's a little higher than GDP. It was in the 80% range. Now it's slightly higher. So our debt to GDP is about 105%. But the debt is still fairly close to what we produce every year. So it's not a total disaster. And it's a big figure. And don't get scared of it when you see it at the end of this year, because it's going to be a real big figure. But again, we needed to get out of and get the economy started again. Okay? Japan, for instance, they have a debt to GDP ratio of 220%. Okay? So that's the key. Is it getting out of hand? As long as your gross domestic product is growing substantially, and it can handle a fairly large debt. Okay, yes, you do want to bring that debt down. That's absolutely true. There's no question about it. But we have to take the debt in relationship to how much goods and services we are producing. Okay? All right. So remember, the margin of propensity to consume is important because it gives us the multiplier. And if you're spending $750 of 1,000 new dollars, that's 3/4. It gives us a multiplier of 4. So if the government, let's say, pumps in $1 into our economy, does our economy grow by $1? No, it grows by $4. That's why we don't go up just a little, we go up quite a bit, okay? And it's due to the multiplier. So it's an important concept to understand, okay? All right, we'll be talking about this a little bit more. Like I said, next video will be on money, and then the last one will be on fiscal policy, which, you know, is a little bit more involved than just the brief outline I gave you here today, fiscal and monetary policy, okay? And that should wrap up our semester. Again, I'm sorry we had to end the year like this. It certainly wasn't anything that I had planned. I had a lot of interesting in-class activities for us, but well, it's just one of those things. Perhaps we'll do it if you move on to intermediate economics. All right, everybody, stay healthy, stay well, and I'll see you in our next clip.